What is going on, gunfighters? Saddle up for gunfighter life. Today, pull up your chairs, gather around while we talk about the best 308 load for X. X, solving for X's in algebra. X could be any number of different things. The best tactical round, the best deer round, the best whatever. That's what we're going to talk about today on Gunfighter Life, so stay tuned. We talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, ammunition, ballistics, hunting, defense, the right way with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. To establish some credibility with the audience, I'm going to put in the bio. If you haven't heard it, you probably want to listen to see why should I even care what this guy has to say. That's a valid question. So either you'll just listen to anybody with a microphone, or you've heard it a bunch of times. Either way, you can skip forward if you want. Skip around 2 minutes and we'll get into talking about 308 loads. I'll roll into a quick abbreviated bio and then into the main topic. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I don't apologize for that. God is number one in my life. I grew up hunting and fishing in the backwoods of the southeastern United States at a very early age. Some of my earliest memories are with firearms. I joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. By God's grace, He got me through that safely. After that, I served as an instructor, an urban warfare instructor and a desert warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps. I also served with the LAPD, both full-time as a sworn police officer and some more specialized assignments, as well as serving in the U.S. Army, full-time and part-time National Guard. I've been a FBI firearms instructor, still am an FBI firearms instructor, have been for a lot of years, also NRA certified and some other three-letter government agency certified. I've been a private contractor for a three-letter government agency I won't specify. I've been the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. By God's grace, He got me through all that in one piece, not because I'm better, but because He chose to have grace and mercy on me. I've been a professional hunter and guide. Professionally hunted things like buffalo and elk. Not many people today can say they've done that, but I'm blessed to be able to say that I have. I've hunted everything from white-tailed deer on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast to gray squirrel on the East Coast to prairie dog on the West Coast and elk and bear and wolf and slain all manner of beast. A state rifle and pistol champion a few times over in a few different disciplines. Now those experiences, it's not because I'm bigger or badder, certainly not bigger. In fact, I met one of the patrons in real life and he said something to the effect of, "I thought you'd be bigger." Reminded me of that William Wallace movie where he's like, "Oh yeah, if William Wallace were here, he'd shoot lightning bolts out of his rear end." Well, I'm not William Wallace, but I am the person that did all those things in the bio. But not because I'm bigger or badder. I don't think that I survived when many other young, good men did not. I give all the glory and all the credit to God, all the talents and experiences that He's given me and the things that He's let me live through. I hope to use them to glorify God and to help you today. So if I boast in anything, it's not in my strength, it's in that God had mercy on me and saved me because He had a purpose for me. And hopefully I can use those talent, skills, and abilities to serve you today. Alright, before we get started on actual use cases, let me say that guns are individualistic, rifles are individualistic. We could have two of the same make and model gun that prefer different loads. So I'm going to throw out probably a go-to load, like where I would start, but that doesn't mean that your gun is going to like it. That may mean for whatever reason you choose something else, and that's fine. I don't know you, and even if I knew what gun you had, until I actually shoot it, and more importantly, until you actually shoot it and train with it and test it, you don't know that you are choosing a good load for your gun. That said, you got to start somewhere, but a load that shoots really good out of my gun may not shoot good out of your gun. Again, rifles are individualistic. Don't think that because so-and-so on the intranet said that Hornady ELDX is the most accurate 308 round ever. That means You might want to look there and start there. Try it, but that doesn't mean it's going to be the most accurate out of your gun. There's a lot of gray area in ballistics, and there's a lot of kind of head scratching. Why is this the way that it is? Why did this perform the way that it did? Barrel harmonics and different groove rifling, different styles of rifling, even humidity, all that stuff can play a part. So just keep that in mind. Just because I'm saying this is a really good, just because I say this is a really good load choice for this application doesn't mean it's the best for you out of your gun and your situation. So keep that in mind. With that, let's roll into our first use case. Let us start with varmint hunting. Varmint hunting with a 308? What in tarnation? No, seriously. Recently did an episode, my go-to survival gun for peanut butter and chocolate hitting the fan. I chose 308. One of the reasons is it's cost-effective to shoot. It's decent, efficient, powerful, and it's versatile. Some of that versatility is that it's a decent, middle-of-the-road, effective, efficient cartridge. Some of that is just economy of scale. There are a bunch of different loads. And I know it's marketing that you got to have this gun for pronghorn, and you got to have this gun and this caliber for mule deer, and you got to have this gun and this caliber for coyote hunting, and you got to have this one for feral hogs, except you don't. Right? The 308 will kill all those things. And if you're the guy that wants a specific tailor-made gun and caliber, you give me a specific situation down to the terrain and the species and even the weather and the temperature, I could probably give you a cherry-picked better caliber. But 308 is fine for varmint hunting, and if 308 is what you have, let's say it is your ranch rifle. Like I have been a ranch manager. I have managed an exotic game ranch. If you have a ranch rifle and it is a 308, you might want a good varmint load. And it's a bit superfluous to hunt prairie dogs and things with a 308. It'll certainly do it if that's what you have. If you come across a bunch of prairie dogs, you probably want to go get a different rifle for that. Talking about bigger varmints. Let's start with probably the most prodigious spreader and breeder of my lifetime, the coyote. You see, when I was growing up on the mid-Atlantic, East Coast, Tidewater, backwater, redneck, South area, never saw a coyote. I heard of coyotes other places, but I never heard of any where I lived. And they were like hushed whispers. Now they're everywhere, right? They're probably in every single state in the 50 states. That wasn't the case even when I was a kid, and I'm not that old, guys. They have bred and spread prodigiously. So how do we kill them? More importantly, what's a good load for this with a 308? Now, let me say certainly, if you just have a go-to deer load and you see a coyote and you want to take a coyote and it's legal and it helps the environment where you're at, then shoot it with your deer load. But we're talking about best or really good go-to load for this. Like if we do this in an algebra equation, A equals the load, B equals the caliber 308, solve for X in this case being varmint, coyote size, critters. 110 grain 308 Varmageddon bullets. These are loaded by both Nosler that I see, factory loads, both Nosler and Underwood. Give credit where it's due. I looked up on Midway USA. I get no kickback from them, no sponsors from them, guys. I don't know if they even know this podcast exists. This is not a pay-to-play thing here. I'm just telling you, I looked it up. It's one of my go-to sites, mostly because it's easy to use and easy to navigate. I've been using it for a lot of years. In fact, recently had to do some background stuff for the U.S. government to do some contracting work. And to look at my address history, I pulled up Midway USA and looked at my old addresses. They go back a long time, just to give you an idea of how long I've been using them. But they're a good site to use. I'm not saying they're necessarily the best, but they're good. Anyway, they had the Underwood 110 grain Varmageddon load in stock, and they have a little notify me one for the Nosler. But 110 grain Varmageddon, that'd be a phenomenal coyote choice, assuming it shoots well out of your gun. Now, the manufacturer's velocity says 3,300 feet per second. That's pretty screaming for a 308. If you're not familiar, pretty vanilla load is 150 at 2820. That's like a regular load. Now you're getting less grain weight, but I don't think you need 100. You don't need it. It'll certainly kill, but you don't need 150 grain for a coyote. You're getting a lot more speed. Speed will often give you greater point blank trajectory and less time in flight. And part of the reason these bullets break up fast is part of the reason I think the Varmint is in a lighter bullet, because it's traveling faster, it will break up, and a coyote's not a thick target. So, really good load for that. 110 grain Varmint. Again, kind of a waste on a prairie dog, but if you see a fat rock chuck or a marmot or something and you want to take that out, and the 308's what you have, it's a good load for that. You see an armadillo or two tearing up underneath a fence, letting the coyotes in. It'll work for that. A really good, let's say, larger varmint load. Now let's move up to almost unarguably, maybe not your personal, but if you take a step back and are circumspect, America's kind of preeminent hunting animal that we hunt, that we really think about when we think about American hunting. The white-tailed deer. From Florida to Idaho. From Maine down to Texas. Right? A lot of white-tailed deer. A lot of people live east of the Mississippi, which that's kind of your big game hunting animal there. Or a few exceptions or of bigger things. But it's kind of the most commonly hunted, I think, by the most people as far as large game in America. And there's a ton of loads for this. If I gotta, and this is going to be controversial, right? But if I gotta pick one, this isn't necessarily my favorite load even, but if I gotta give respect where it's due, Remington Corelock. Their tagline, the deadliest mushroom in the woods. Remington Corelock 150 grain. So we're going to put this in the best classic category. Guys, the Remington Corelock 150 grain 308 load has put a lot of deer in the dirt. Put a lot of venison in the freezer. You look for a classic load. If you just want a 308 and you want to hunt deer, you're not the guy that's like, I want the latest and greatest, whizziest, bangiest bells and whistles around. I just want a good load. Hopefully my rifle shoots well that will drop a white-tailed deer at reasonable ranges. By reasonable, I mean almost anything that people hunt deer at. 150 grain Remington Corelock. Does it have the highest BC? Does it have the latest and greatest shiny tip on it? Does it have a fancy shiny hologram on the box? Does it say tactical? No. But it kills deer, right? If you want a good, classic, and kind of go-to standard load to shoot white-tailed deer, to kill white-tailed deer, to put them in the freezer, Remington Corelock 150 grain. Deer have not suddenly donned Kevlar. They're not suddenly some kind of super roided out antlered machine, right? 308 Remington Corelock has been putting venison in the freezer for a long time. If you want a really good go-to load, if I'm picking like a go-to load, a classic load, Remington Corelock, it's a good one. The fact that it's still being made, that's an old load. It was a classic load when I was a kid. It's kind of got a following for a reason. It works. Now you could argue about grain weights, but I think for white-tailed deer, 150 grain, it's classic, it's good, it works. I think if you're shooting a heavier grain weight bullet for deer, for white-tailed deer, it's because you want to, not because you have to. 150 grain Remington Corelock. Now they do make the Remington Corelock tipped, which does come in a fancier box, so there's something. But it has a tip on it, which you may or may not care about. I think that's a lot of for the crowd that knows the Remington Corelock name, but maybe wants something a little bit more modern. And if you want to run that way, can't imagine it performs worse than the old school Remington Corelock. Whether it makes a practical difference in the field or not, can't say. But the old school Remington Corelocks, classic. Go out in your red plaid flannel shirt and your Jones hat and put some venison in the freezer. It's a good load. Now, if we look at Western medium game, I'm talking maybe even the same species, maybe whitetail, but we're talking different terrain. Talking whitetail, mule deer, and pronghorn, of which I've been blessed to hunt and take all three. A lot of times in a high desert environment, which makes up a large portion of the West, fairly arid, and In there, if you spot and stalk and still hunt, I don't think you need a crazy long range round. Get mad at that if you want, if you've been marketed to it and think you need to have a crazy long range round. If you want to do that, that's fine, but you don't need it to hunt those species. But you may get a little bit longer range on average than you will back east. For this, and I used to load this bullet before I remember being offered in a factory load. I used to load the TSX. It may have even been the bullet prior to the TSX. It was a while ago. But the Barnes TSX. This is a solid copper monolithic bullet. And no, it's not just for hippies. It's a really good bullet. Coppers play by a different rule than other bullets. So don't think that a certain grain weight bullet in solid copper performs like the same or similar grain weighted bullet in a cup and core bullet, a traditional lead jacketed bullet. It does not. It does not play by the same rules. The Barnes, now it's the TSX, tipped triple shock, but it's a solid copper monolithic. These bullets are really good on game. I mean, just they punch well above their weight class. And again, if we go to the vanilla load of 150 grain at 2820, these are pushing 130 grain at 3125. Point blank range, meaning like if I want to shoot a deer at 300 yards, I don't have to sit there and mess around with a laser rangefinder and all these electronics and a turn dial. I've been there, done that. Not how I like to hunt. I like the field craft of it, not the mathematics and the electronics of that kind of thing. And if you like the other, that's fine. But 130 grain at 3125 will give you a decent point blank range, and it performs really well on game. It's loaded by Barnes. It's a Barnes bullet. That 130 grain solid copper would be a good go-to choice for a 308. I'm not saying there's not better calibers, but it's still a good caliber. You're talking pronghorn, western whitetail, mule deer, 130 grain solid copper. It's a solid choice. And again, the caveat, if your gun likes them, I have found the solid coppers to be very accurate. I have heard, and I heard from somebody that has more experience at this than me, probably shot a lot more solid coppers than I have. I mean, there's people in California, that's all they hunt with, but I guess it's not recommended that you switch back and forth with your barrel between solid copper and regular lead jacketed bullets. Something to do with the barrel and the copper fouling and accuracy. I haven't found that to be the case. I didn't even know it was a thing back when I was switching back and forth, and I still do in the 30-06, and I haven't seen that issue, but it is a potential issue. To give credit where credit is due, I heard that from Ron Spomer, and he's got decades of hunting and guiding and that kind of experience, and he says that's a potential issue. So I'm gonna mention that in case it is for you. The solve for that is you just clean down to the bare metal if you're switching back and forth, which I'd find to be a pain in the butt, but if you want to do it, go ahead. But those solid coppers, I have found them to be very accurate. They really, really perform well on game. I mean really well. They really punch above their weight class. You're getting a lighter bullet traveling faster, which again, for point blank range and stuff has its advantages. That 130 grain solid copper is going to kill any of those species well if you do your job well. Barring some weird ballistic anomaly, which does happen, it's a great choice, I think, for that. Now, what about elk? 308's not big enough for elk. Well, there's a ton of dead elk that would beg to differ with that statement. 308 is absolutely enough for elk as long as you're not doing some kind of crazy shooting you probably shouldn't be doing inside the parameters of that caliber. Now, if I'm going to hunt elk with a 308, I'm going to step up in grain weight. Not that you can't kill elk with a 150 grain 308, you certainly can. And I think that solid copper 130 grain would actually do pretty well because they play by their own rules. But it's not my recommendation. It's not what I would say is one of the best loads for elk. Now, if I'm looking at what I'm aware of as factory loaded ammunition available in the 308, I think the 308 performs best in the big game category, unless there's some outlier, which we'll get to later, in the 150 to 170 something-ish range. You get much higher than that, and I would say start looking at switching to an alt-6. Alt-6, they're not equal. They are pretty close in some grain weights, but in heavier bullets, the 30-06 just does a little bit better. But it's a really good option for elk. And again, it's got to shoot good out of your rifle, but talk about terminal performance really well, really good compromise in bullet grain weight for elk and decent velocity. Still doing decent out of a 308. Federal Terminal Ascent. 308 Terminal Ascent, 175 grain bonded. Terminal Ascent is a really good bullet. It's been around long enough, I think, at this point to have some decent street cred in the big game hunting world. Terminal Ascent. It's launching 175 grain at 2600. It says here, copper shank unbonded lead core, retain weight for deep penetration at any range. Like, I'm not into uber long range hunting stuff, but it's a decent bullet. It is a good choice for this. Another really good go-to that I would recommend, 308 168 grain AccuBond. That is a factory load available, either one of those. Now, when I initially thought of this, I thought of 168 grain or better, but Nosler partition, you talk about almost as legendary as the Remington Core Lock. I mean, the Nosler partition is just a fantastic bullet. There is a factory option, 165 grain. And Nosler partitions, if you don't know, were kind of a big leap forward in bullet technology. They partition in the middle of the bullet, and that allows the front to kind of flatten and sometimes fragment, but still leave a pretty substantial shank that drives deep and penetrates deep. It's known for being really good in the field. Well, there is a Nosler trophy grade ammunition 308 165 grain partition load. If you want the most kind of proven bullet for kind of big game, by big I mean like bigger than deer, the Nosler partition is, I don't think legendary is an overstatement. Nosler partition 165 grain. It's a factory load. It is launching at impressive 165 at 2,800 feet per second. That is respectable. That's a good load. I would be confident in any one of those three loads afield. With 308, with a competent shooter, elk hunting. How about black bear? Black bear, or maybe even more widespread. They're not as off hunted as white-tailed deer, but they're probably more widespread. They're probably more widespread as far as geographical area than white-tailed deer. I mean, from Alaska down to Georgia. I think there's even some in Florida. In fact, I believe that is true. So from Florida to Alaska. Black bear. Now, don't make these black bear into the lions of Tsavo. I've had my fair share of tangles with black bear, both hunting them, slaying them. I don't remember how old I was. It may have been 15 or 16, maybe 17, when I took my first bear with a bow. I've taken a lot of bear. I've even had some sketchy encounters where I had bear come into camp, root around, come right up on a bear, mama with cubs. Like, it happens. But black bear get really, really big. Yeah, but they're not usually crazy giant things. You are trying to hunt like the biggest trophy Alberta, Canada black bear corn fed. They can get real big, but most of them aren't that big. Especially talking east of Mississippi. There are some record breakers, there are some really big anomalies, but that's kind of like the hogs. I looked up when I started this episode the average size hog I saw, and do your own research. I could only find one study, and it said the average size hog in Texas is 130 pounds. Not the biggest of animals. The average black bear east of Mississippi is not that big. That said, they are made up a little bit different than deer. You might want a different bullet. And I say might. If you have a good go-to deer load, and that's what you hunt most of the time, and you're really confident, and you've taken a lot of deer with your 150 grain Remington Core Lock, and you want to hunt black bear with Remington Core Lock, I'd say rock on, dude. That is a good choice because you're familiar with it and you're comfortable with it and you shot it. Just keep decent shot angles. I keep it to a good broadside shot. If you know, bear anatomy is a little bit different than deer anatomy or some other ungulate anatomy, but that'll work. I think you want to argue with that, but look maybe at how many bear have been put in the freezer with a 30-30. And a 30-30 150 grain is less powerful than just about any factory loaded 150 grain 308 load. And I think 30-30 is a fine, maybe not the best, but a decent black bear round. So 150 grain Remington Core Lock will certainly do it. Could I find a little bit better? Yeah, let's see if we can do better. in this algebra equation for black bear. Well, how about the Remington Core-Lokt 180 grain? That'll work. I can get 30 more grains. No, but seriously, you might want something that drives a little bit deeper. If you're talking about western black bear, you can certainly get some longer shots. Most shots east of Mississippi on black bear are fairly close. You might move up to 180 grain. You might get a different shot angle, right? If I'm shooting head on with a black bear, I would like to move up to that 180 grain or better. Now they make that Core-Lokt with a traditional Spitzer style, what you would think of in a 308, a pointed bullet, and they make it with a more round nose bullet in 180 grain. Some people like the more flat, less aerodynamic bullets. And if you're going to do brush hunting with it, that's a fine choice. So either one of those in 180 grain. You want the more pointed bullet, the Spitzer style bullet, or the fat, rounder nose bullet. Inside of 200 yards, which is most places east of Mississippi you're going to hunt, either one will work fine. All right, let's switch a little bit. We talked about hunting, and I'm certainly not going to get into every species. If you talk about hogs, refer to deer loads. Again, you could make it out to be the Hogzilla, but if the average size deer in Texas, Florida, California, Georgia, right, the deer load will do just fine. A lot of people hunt hog with 223. A mediocre deer round in 308 is better than pretty much any load you're going to find in 223. Get mad at that if you want, but just look at the numbers. So your deer loads will work fine on hogs. If you're that concerned about it, move up to the loads I mentioned for elk. But if you're shooting a lot of hogs, that's going to get expensive. The good thing about the kind of plain vanilla deer loads is that they're pretty affordable. What I would call like a Walmart load. You can walk into Walmart and get them. If you got a lot of hogs, that in and of itself is an advantage. Maybe shouldn't be your primary concern, but it is something to consider. So for hogs, reference deer and elk loads that I already mentioned. If we talk about wolf aren't that big bodied either. I've successfully hunted wolf. I would actually, of the loads that I mentioned, I would probably stick with the 130 grain solid copper. On wolf, it'll do fine. Even the 110 grain Varmageddon will do fine, but if that's your one and only wolf you get to hunt, you might want to save the pelt. Probably going to do more damage with that round than you might want to. So the 130 grain solid copper, that would be a good choice. Any of the deer loads would be a good choice. A lot of times the wolves are taken when you're hunting something else and you're like, oh, there's a wolf. So in that case, refer to whatever deer elk load you have in your gun. But if I was going out specifically for wolf, that 130 grain solid copper would be a good choice. Also, there's a Hornady Custom Light 125 grain load. That would do just fine. Now let's switch gears a little bit to more of the tactical side. You want a tack driver, you say. 308's a sniper rifle, you say. I want to snap necks and drive tacks. Like a sniper. Alright, well, I'm saying I agree with those statements that I just made. A lot of people think that way. But if you want, like, again, especially with this choice, your rifle may have a preferred diet that is not this. Hornady Match 160 grain ELD. The Hornady ELD has a good reputation for accuracy. There's a reason I didn't mention it in the hunting loads. There's a reason it has a good reputation for accuracy. The Hornady Match ammo 168 grain ELD, that would be my first recommendation if you're looking for good accuracy out of your 308. And before somebody loses it, I do know that they make the Hornady ELD X, which there's a reason I mentioned those hunting bullets in the hunting section. They were designed to be good hunting bullets. The ELD X was a good match long-range target bullet that they thought, people are shooting deer with this, how can we make it better to shoot deer? Kind of like, can you haul gravel with the Honda Civic? Yeah, you can haul gravel with the Honda Civic. You get a little pull-behind trailer and haul some gravel with the Honda Civic. It'll work. But better if you get a vehicle designed to haul stuff like an F-150. May not like that analogy, but that's one I'm going to use. Now, there is another, if you're looking for an accurate load that I think I should mention. Now, there is the 308 or 7.62x51 XM or M118. This is a heavier for caliber. 175 grain load. Now, I hesitate to mention this because there are several makers that load this, and don't think that because one of the manufacturers makes it and it shoots that they're all going to shoot the same. Also, don't think that because it's a military, special load that it's somehow better than a civilian load. And I mentioned the Hornady match ammo first. But if you're just like, I want a military rifle, I want a military round, then I should mention that XM or M118. It's heavy 4 caliber, decent, more accurate, I would say, probably out of your rifle, as long as your rifle can spin it, than M80, which is not saying much. Kind of like saying your motorcycle is faster than a moped. But if you're looking for a military load, you might look at that M118. You're looking for a widely available, more accurate kind of target load. That, especially if you're going to buy a bunch of it, and you want to buy a bunch of it like, I would say surplus, but not even really a lot of that surplus out there, I don't think. An affordable buy in bulk kind of shooting for target stuff ammunition. That's not a bad one to look at. Again, that's M118. What about a go-to tactical load? All right. If I'm giving you like a go-to tactical load, by tactical I mean you have it loaded in your gun for doing gunfighter stuff. And as the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters, familiar with 308 in a martial context, this would be my number one recommendation. Tactical bonded, federal premium tactical bonded 168 grain duty ammunition. Nickel plated usually means that the cases are a little bit slipperier, which can make a difference in malfunctions and stuff in a semi-auto. It is bonded, so if you're going to shoot through stuff to get to a bad guy, bonded is a good thing. 168 grain, it's a good middle of the road. Now I have this loaded in some mags. I don't have it right in front of me. But I do believe it's got the primers that are sealed for moisture, which a good thing. Also kind of prefer federal primers. Anyway, if you're asking me for a go-to tactical load, good at a myriad of practical distances, good for different type of martial applications, because if you cherry pick one, then I can probably cherry pick you a load. Super short barrel 308, which we could debate whether that's a good idea or not, but I'd probably pick a different load. But for a good all-around tactical load, federal, tactical bonded 168 grain duty ammunition. Now I kind of saved my number one recommendation load. Like if you're just like, I got a 308, I need a good load for it. No caveats. Broad spectrum. Well, I've been using this load for a lot of years. It's a great load whether you talk about tactical, hunting. It's maybe not as accurate as a Hornady ELD, but in my experience, a very, very accurate factory load, widely available. It's a hunting design bullet, so it's got decent terminal performance. It's not overly expensive. What is it? What is this one load that I would recommend if you just said, give me a good load for all manner of things in a 308? It is the Federal. I'm not sponsored by Federal. I get no kickbacks. I'm not giving you a link where you can click and I'll get 10% of every box of ammo you buy. No, I'm just recommending it because it's a good go-to load with no other caveats. Federal 150 grain Power Shock. Good deer load, good tactical load, good just going out and shooting load, good hog load, good bear load. It's a good load. It's affordable. It's, again, in my experience, and 308's very, very accurate. I'm talking about scary accurate for what it costs. Could you find a more accurate load, especially if you hand load, for sure. But in this price range, it's the most accurate load that I know of. Even that Federal premium tactical bonded bullet that I mentioned, could you argue that it's a better bullet for tactical stuff? Yeah, that's why I recommended it first, but it's quite a bit more expensive probably, and not nearly as available. And I found it to be as accurate. I haven't found it to be more accurate than the just plain old good, and I will call it a Walmart load, Federal Power Shock 150 grain 308. It's a good all-around load. Like if you're asking me for just a number one recommendation, no caveats, I don't know whether you're rocking it through a Scar 17 or a Kimber mountain rifle, Federal Power Shock 150 grain is a good load. Accurate, affordable, designed for hunting from the ground up. Ergo, terminal performance in mind, it's a good load. So there we go. With that, I appreciate you listening. If you got anything out of this episode for the fraction of the cost of a box of that 308, you can sign up and become a patron. If you appreciate the content because it's not full with a bunch of blasphemy and disgusting stuff, something you could listen to with your family in the car, and you just appreciate the amount of knowledge that you got, and you want to help support the show, there's a reason I'm not pushing buy this load that they just gave me from X company. It's the best. It's 20 feet per second faster than a load that's been around for 50 years. If you don't buy it, you're going to miss out. FOMO. Right? You don't get that here. If you appreciate that, is that worth the cost of a box of ammo? Is supporting the show and supporting, talk about small business, talk about small, employees one, talk about veteran owned, here you go. US, here you go. You talk about supporting small, veteran owned business, here you go. There should be a Patreon link in the show notes. With that, your tactical tip of the day. One cool thing about the Federal PowerShock, at least the ones that I'm aware of, they come in the 20 round boxes, a blue box. Inside there, they come in plastic sleeves of 10. They come with little holes already cut out. This is awesome. They were designed, I think, to go on a belt, but you may not know that, right? You can take these out if you're going hunting and you just have a, let's say, normal sized belt. You can run them, carry 10 more in the small of your back. Carry them on whatever side you want to do your quick reload from. Or if you can disassemble quickly your rifle sling and you want to put a couple more rounds on there, you can do that as well. It's a really cool thing that they built into the box of ammunition that really is not going to cost you any more than most other boxes of ammunition, an ammunition carrier. You can even save those up if you want a good expedient way to carry more ammo. 10 rounds, slim, convenient. If you don't want to carry them on a belt or on your sling or something, you can put them in your pocket. Cargo pocket, even a front pants pocket. Those should slip in there. Keep the rounds oriented in a proper manner. Stop them from clinking around, making noise when you're hunting. It's just a really cool feature. So if you didn't know, when you pull those out, if you inspect them, you'll see that they were designed for that. So that's a pretty cool thing. Even if you don't want to use them with that load, if you see a similar cartridge packaging, you might want to save it for another application later. It's your tactical tip of the day, your tactical verse of the day. You'll find this in Psalm 146. Happy is he who has the God of Jacob for his help, whose hope is in the Lord his God, who made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, who keeps truth forever, who executes justice for the oppressed, who gives food to the hungry. The Lord gives freedom to the prisoners. Now, that whole psalm is beautiful. I encourage you to read it. That's just a part of it. My commentary on that. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. You're not free if you're a slave of sin. You might think yourself free, doing whatever you want, living your best life, whatever the modern garbage vernacular is. If you're a slave of sin, you're not free. You're a slave to that thing. You want to be free, go to Jesus. You shall know the truth, Jesus, and the truth shall make you free. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.